let's start talking about the second half of the chapter. So this will cover pages 109 to 127 and exercise book pages 43 through 52. And what this chapter is going to, or the second half of this chapter is going to really look at is, now let's take a look at what some of those patterns, those spelling patterns are, and why and how we use them. Some interesting things about why we use certain letters, what certain letters are allowed, that you guys can use to teach your students. And then I'll show you a reference that's going to help you, because I will admit there is a lot to remember. Some of them we just know and we just do because we're used to it. But some of them, having the reason why, we little be practice to remember them all. So moving to our first one, with these patterns and these constraints, there's some interesting things to notice. We have a lot more straightforward and common consonants being used for our certain patterns than we do vowels. Vowels, there's a lot more variation and a little bit more ambiguity when it comes to our vowel graphemes. But when we look at our consonants, our most common, of course, are going to be these one-to-one correspondences. And then we have things called doublets, and that's where we're just going to repeat the same letter for the same sound. And you might notice that DD is not on here, nor is GG, because those ones aren't as common as you might see, like the double F, the double S. And those, of course, go along with the floss rule. Now, you can also take a look at the next column over, which is digraphs, and there are a lot more digraphs that people consider as, or Louisa considers as a digraph, than we typically teach as a digraph. For example, the DGE and the GE, the soft G combination. And that's because you get a unique sound when two letters are used. But then there's some argument whether or not that GH would be a silent letter combination and that GE would be kind of a silent letter combination. But there's some interesting things that happen with those that we'll talk a little bit about later. So for now, we're going to just list them as two letters that make a unique sound or help support a unique sound. So therefore, it kind of falls under the realm of being a digraph. Typically, we wouldn't teach that way to students because we want to keep that kind of, I would guess, more familiar pattern of CH, SH, TH, WH, possibly PH, because that's a little easier for students to understand. Then, of course, we do have a lot of silent letter combinations. Some of those are more common than others, and they do have to relate to where the word origin comes from. And then, of course, we have our true oddity consonants, like Q, U, and X, which we've talked a lot about in the past. Vowels tend to be a little bit more hairy. As you can see, there's a lot more combinations and possibilities for our vowel groups to join up. You've got the short vowels, of course, and then you have your tense vowels, which are open syllables. Then you have your pattern of the vowel consonant E, and there is still some debate whether or not there is ear and air is a, well, that's the vowel R, sorry, whether those are vowel consonant E or whether the vowel plus R. And it's easier to remember things like ear and air are, especially ARE for air, it's a vowel plus an R, because you still have a vowel consonant E, but the R is still making its own unique kind of phoneme in there. So we can talk a little bit about those later as well. Then, of course, you have all your variations for your vowel teams. Some of them with silent letter combinations, some of them with R. And then our favorite good old fashioned 5, those R controlled, or those heavily influenced vowels from R, which makes their own unique sound in a vowel as well. So what do we get from this? Well, we get the fact that the vowel graphemes have more variation than the consonants do. So we tend to teach our students consonants first. And when we go into difficulty, we want to get even those digraphs and those doublets before we start going into a lot of those vowel combinations, because they're more reliable. We teach short vowels first because they're more predictable, and there's certain patterns that go with those, and certain consonants patterns that we'll use because we want our vowel to be laxed. So that helps to filter out what is a foundational piece, what is a more advanced piece or letter sequence. Some other things that is good to know is that sometimes we have some of these extra spellings because they have to fulfill a unique role. For example, we might recruit a vowel letter that is not going to make a sound, but will be there to help protect the consonant from shifting to a soft consonant, such as in guest. that U was recruited to prevent it looking from GEST, which would be gest. And we don't want that sound, so we recruited a letter U to kind of be a protector for that consonant. You also have consonants that are recruited to protect vowels, such in the word fudge. If it was FUGE, that silent E would also influence the U to being a vowel consonant E pattern, as well as influencing the G to make the J sound. So we recruit the D in order to protect that laxed vowel and let it be fudge instead of fuge. You also have some different combinations occurring because we want to show a distinction between certain spellings. A lot of times this happens with homophones. We'll choose a different spelling to show steak is spelled S-T-A-K-E and S-T-E-A-K. You also have things like loose and lose that are very close, but their sounds are slightly different. So we use a different spelling in the middle to show that there is a slightly different sound, even though they're very similar words. We might also use 1, 2B as a marker. This is a little like the protection rule, but a little different. As in the K in picnicking, it's a signal that we're going to keep that K sound instead of allowing it to slide into a S sound. So there you have another example of another consonant helping to protect a fellow consonant, which is a little different than when it protects a vowel. So there's some very interesting things that come in. We'll talk a bit about those as we keep going. But because there's so many, and you might be asking yourself, well, why? How am I supposed to remember all these? Well, in your smart folder that I shared with you, there is a slideshow that is called Spelling Rules for English Phonemes. There's a really big one that has all of them in it. It just says new. And then I split it up into smaller sections so that it could open up on Google. And this slideshow then will open up and it'll tell you which rules are listed in the title. Things like the TCH or the DGE or the vowel, things like that. But they're still kind of grouped together. And they're a really nice, easy way to show what patterns we might use in the beginning, when the sound is at the beginning, when it's in the middle, what's in the end, and then with some information about why. That's just help along because sometimes it is hard to remember what some of these are. So with that being a reference, let's take a look at some of our more common occurring spelling rules / spelling guidelines. And please remember that as you're teaching some of these spelling quote unquote rules, that it may be better to teach them as generalizations or as guides, because we know we have some influences from other languages. We know that we have some exceptions due to certain phonotactic guides that we might teach students to, here's your first pick if the sound is in this location. Here's your second pick if the sound is in your location, so they can have a guide. So calling them spelling guides for each location, it might be better than saying it's a rule that we often break. Okay, so let's take a look at some of those. First one is the soft C. Now, of course, that soft C comes from our Norman French influence, and it's when we're going to make that S sound when the C is followed by E, I, or Y. If you have a C followed by A, U, and O, it will make the K sound. If you would like to have that K sound and you need to have an E, A, or Y, E, I, or Y after it, then use a letter K. Don't use a letter C, and that would be something I would let the kids know. A soft G follows the same rule with an E, I, or Y following the G sound. It's going to make a J. So therefore, if you see a U and an A and an O, it's going to say G. If you want the J sound at the end, you must add a protector, D, G, E for short vowels, and otherwise you can use GE or GI, GY. Just remember that at the end of a word, J will never be spelling the J sound at the end of a word. So you're always going to be going back to that Norman French soft G if the J is at the end. Now, just so we know we have exceptions, because they know they show up, any of our German-based words may still have that G sound with I and E. Again, these are going to be your more common words than you have with the French. So I would make sure to point that out and play around with those guys first when you're first learning the G sound, and then bring this up with, say, hey, these are some French-based words, and make that distinction, because you do have things like give and gift and get and go that are all German-based. Well, go has an O after it. but they are not going, and giraffe, they're not going to follow this French influence because those are German-based words that we came from our Anglo-Saxon roots. Then we've got this wonderful versatile W. Now, W, it's very vowel-like. Remember, it's a glide. And so we're going to start with that W, and it's going to want to go right into a vowel sound, which means it can't be at the end because that W needs to be in the middle or the beginning. So as a consonant sound, you can teach them that you will use a W for this W, or when you see a W, it's going to be W because it's at the beginning or the middle. If you happen to see at the end or right, not necessarily always right behind a vowel team, but at the end is what my biggest hint would be. It's going to be a member of a vowel team. It's not going to say W. So that's kind of a good decoding hint to give them. And then you have Y, which does a little bit more, but is very similar. If it's at the beginning or the middle, it's going to say its Y sound. And then, of course, it can represent at the end of a syllable for E, I, or I, and it can also be part of a vowel team at the end. You are not going to make the Y sound at the end of a word. So when you see Y at the end of a word, it's more than likely part of a vowel team. Now let's look at K. So this is that K sound. Kind of taps into what I started talking about in that soft C. It really depends on what phoneme comes after that K sound or what you want to have occur after that K sound. If you have an O, A, U, R, or L, you are more than likely going to use a C. Because C is more often used in our language than K, and we really don't like to have KRKL. It's default C. It's why we teach it first. But if you still want the K sound, but there's an I and a Y or an E, you're going to bring in that K instead of a C. Now, you'll have CK at the end of a laxed vowel. You're going to have QU before a vowel because our French words will use it at the end, but that'll make a K sound like unique. If it's at the beginning, then QU will do its qua, but you can also tell there's a little bit of a K in that Q as well. And then, of course, our Greek words, CH will be a K sound as well. Okay? So words borrowed from other languages could have the K sound in it, like klutz, but these are ones that are unique and are not English words. They are words we have stolen from Australian or from Japan. Things like karate and kangaroo. Those are all from other languages. Kangaroo is not an English word. It's an Aboriginal word. So keep that in mind. And that's how we explain it, kids, and they accept that. It's pretty easy for them to grasp onto that. TCH and DGE, of course, are both going to come after a short vowel at the end of a one-syllable word. And we have OW, OU versus OW. OU is going to be followed by consonants. OW is going to be at the end of a syllable. Then we have OI. OI is in the middle of a syllable. OY is typically at the end of a syllable. And of course, we have the floss rule, which is also going to be following a short vowel. And because short vowels attract consonants, this is why we get those doublets of the double R, double L, double S, double Z, and crazy X. See, this is so much fun. I love this because we get all these fun rules and all these crazy things that happen. And they're just things that we know now as adults, but we need to explicitly point out to kids because they won't get this on their own. So crazy X is the only grapheme that can make two sounds. And most often we say the X is going to represent a K and a S. But that is only when we have it in between an unstressed vowel or at the end. If you have an unstressed and then a stressed vowel, it's actually going to make the voiced version of z, so exact. So it's really another indication of why we really should spend some time early on helping kids to understand what a schwa is. Schwa is not super hard for them to understand. They just need to be taught how to recognize it, what an unstressed or a stressed vowel is. So between a stressed then unstressed, you have the x. Between the unstressed and the stressed, so the other way, you have its voiced version on. X. Now, if it ever shows up at the beginning, it's going to make a z sound. So you got a very crazy X doing some crazy things. Now, U. We've seen U come up several times, right? Well, U is actually going to represent the W sound if it's with a Q. So we have that weird kind of QU combo blend. It is a vowel by itself, or it can be in a team, as in oo and and unicorn. And it acts as a protector for G so that it doesn't say a soft G, as in vague and guessed. So some fun little jobs that some of these guys have. Let's practice that a little bit with our soft K and our soft C, or sorry, hard C and soft C, the K and the S sort. We've got some words here: camp, sky, scrap, cost, king, scuttle, kettle, cusp, scent, city, skin. You can go ahead and push pause and divide those words up and notice if you know, see if you notice any patterns. So go ahead and pause. I'm assuming those people who paused and have now restarted. So take a look at all of our hard C's. And if you notice, we have CA, CU, CR, CO, CU. So all of these are that K sound, if you notice that pattern we talked about before. Now take a look at your soft C's. Scent, city, cycle. I'll hold on to that one, sorry. CE, CI, CY, so that follows that soft C rule. And then we have king, sky, kettle. If you notice, it's the same as the soft C rule, but we're using K because we don't want the sound to become a soft C. Okay, now take a pause and look at letter B. When am I going to use, sorry, let me rephrase that. When am I going to keep the ABLE, and when can I drop off the silent, or sorry, when am I going to drop off the ending in order to keep my, let me try this again. I know how to explain this. When am I going to drop my E to add my ending? So remember that soft C, that soft G is going to be your big indicator. So take a minute and think, did I drop my silent E or did I keep it? Pause it. Welcome back. So if you notice, if the suffix has or starts with an A or an O or something other than I and E, you're going to want to keep your silent E because otherwise you're going to be inforkable. You want it to stay a soft C, so you need the E to stay there. So financeable, you're going to have to keep your E, otherwise it becomes financable. It goes back to that same rule of that E needs to be there to force out that soft C. Changing doesn't need it because the I does the same thing that the silent E does. Outrageous, you've got to keep the E or it'd be outrageous. So that's kind of fun. It's just double checks. Like if the E does the same thing as the I, or the I does the same thing as the E does, then you can drop it. If it doesn't, like if it's an A, it's going to change that sound. You're going to lose your soft sound. So you're going to have to keep that silent E. Okay, go ahead and we're going to do this next one. So with this one, it's the same kind of thing, but we have these two suffixes, cent and cant, that mean the same thing. They do the same thing to the definition of the word. But when do I have CENT and when do I have CANT? And again, it's that soft C. Does your base word need to keep the soft C or can it lose it? Does it not need it? So go ahead and pause and try this one out. Welcome back and let's take a look. So it's applicant, so we need the CA. Intoxicant, supplicant, beneficent, so we need that soft C. Accent, acquiescent, again, we need that soft C, so we're going to use an E. Adolescent, if I used an A, it would be beneficant, accent, or accant, acquiescent, and those aren't the words we want. So significant, we want the hard K. Insignificant, we want the hard K. Adjacent, lubricant, and complacent. So hopefully you can see it all comes down to what we want that C to say, soft or hard. Then, of course, we have our last practice, which is D, which is the CI words. So we have agent C, unicycle, frequent C. So take a look at those and see, what do you see the job doing? Well, it's actually talking about the Y. So is the Y going to be an I, an E, or an I? So separate those out and think, do you see anything to help guide when that Y is going to be I, when it's going to be E, and when it's going to be I? Just take a minute, take a look at that. If you're like me and you're like, huh? There really isn't a whole lot to help you with that unless you know where the word comes from. The only one I can say for certainty is at the end of a two-syllable word, that Y after the C is going to be an E, because you have Y at the end of two-syllable words will take on that E sound. Symbol, cylinder, cynical, cystic, those ones have a consonant right after that in your syllable break. So therefore, you're going to be prompting a short vowel, just like you would with any closed syllable. Cyber, cyclone, unicycle, cyclops, and cyanide is an open syllable. Therefore, that Y is going to represent a long vowel. All right, so next practice is taking a little bit more look at that hard K sound. I'm going to let you take a longer pause here and do all three sections because, again, you are looking at sorting out these hard Ks. This is one of the powerful tools that you can use in establishing these patterns is word sorts. But you're going to want to make sure you talk about why and any patterns that they see. So not only do you have a chance to practice with some of these rules right now as an adult, but you get a chance to practice of what kind of things would you focus on if you did a word sort with your students. So go ahead and pause and we'll be back together in just a few minutes. Okay, welcome back. Let's take a look at this first one. We want to sort with CK, K plus, C plus K, vowel plus KE, and then it looks like a vowel plus K, but it looks like a long vowel. I can't see my mark quite well. So let's go ahead and split them up and see what happens. In your CK row, you should have shack, struck, pack, and click. What do you notice about the vowels right before those? Hopefully you notice that they are all short vowels. Now let's take a look at consonant plus K. So this isn't C like CK. This is a consonant plus a K. So we have blank, task, stark, and think. So we can have a short vowel and a consonant. We can use a K at the end. We don't often like to use C's at the end. So if you have a consonant before your K sound, more than likely you're going to use a K. Now we have a vowel. It's a vowel consonant E, if you notice that pattern there. So as you guys wrote those in there, talking to your students, you talk about that pattern like, oh, I see a vowel consonant E. What would happen if we did a vowel consonant E and we used a C? That silent E would make it a soft C. So because we want the K sound, we have to use a K. And then, of course, we have this last pattern, which is a vowel team. And would we use a vowel team before a K sound? Only if it was in the middle, because we really don't like to use C's at the end. So you can use vowel teams in front of the letter K to make that K sound. So what kind of rule could we generate from this? Well, K is used in vowel consonant E patterns after vowel teams and after consonants. CK is only used after a short vowel. So if you needed some work distinguishing between that, this would be a good word sort to do that with the students. Okay, let's take a look at our QU, our X, and our CKX. Now, some of you guys might be like, oh, okay, this is where it gets tricky because QU is a Q representation. X is a X, which has a K in it too. But how's that different from a CKS? Let's take a look and see if we can figure out why. So let's take our QU first. We have quiz, quest, quack, quick, conquest. What sound then does the QU represent? That K, W. Let's look at the X at the end. Flex, tax, wax, suffix, index, sax. What makes this list different than this list, which is tax, flex, wax, sax, cracks? Doesn't that sound an awful lot like the ending here? And a lot of your kids might be confused with that, but that is okay because these are plurals. And if you're talking about helping them to distinguish between X and CKX, yes, they're still short vowels. Go back to the meaning of a plural. It is okay and completely appropriate to talk to kindergartners about plurals. So if I have a word like tax, we tell them, all right, we have tax. And if I want to find out that if it is a plural with a CKS, or if I'm going to use an X, I'm going to look at my sentence and how it's used, and I'm going to ask myself, is a plural or not? If it's a plural, then I probably want to have a CKX. If it's not, then X is a good bet. So I would use in a sentence, have them listen to how it's used, and then ask them if it's plural. For example, with tax, because tax is a tricky one. My mom will pay a tax when she buys a candy bar. I ask my students, tax, I will pay a tax. Is that meaning more than one? Or is that just sounds one thing? A tax. A tax sounds like one thing, so therefore it is not plural. It cannot be CKX. Then I'm going to go ahead and go with my X. Now for tax, it doesn't work as well to say, to go from the plural angle. That's why it's a little easier with that one to go from the context angle. But if I do suffix and I ask my students, boys and girls, if suffix was a plural, that means I can take the s off because I would still keep my k sound. So what is a suffix? Well, I don't know what a suffix is. That's not a real thing because it's a suffix. Therefore, suffix must use an X instead of a CKS. You could do something like wax and say, can you have just a whack? Yep, I can just whack instead of wax. So you can help distinguish between that way. Those ones are kind of tricky, but you hopefully can see the connections between those and how you'd point those out. So the rule that we're going to establish is X ends in uninflected verb or singular noun. CKX ends a plural or inflected verb. So a plural noun or inflected verb. So that's something that's not too early to help teach them that. And usually CK comes in first grade anyway. All right, let's look at initial K sounds, final K sounds, plus a T sound, and then final K sounds by itself. So if we divided that up, which words have that initial K sound? So that K is the very beginning word. And you're going to look at clinic, critic, comic, conflict, construct, compact, collect. Do you see anything about those K at the beginning with a C? Remember, we're just focused on the K at the beginning. How about that final K plus a T sound? The biggest thing I hope you're going to notice is that with O and a consonant, you're going to use a C at the beginning. And I hope you notice that with a T sound at the end, you're going to use a C because our blend there is a KT. It's not a KT. We don't spell KT with a KT. And then hopefully what they're going to notice is, yes, it doesn't happen very often, but we do have an IC, which is a suffix in that final position. Remember how I said earlier, if you look over here, we usually like to put a K for that final position? Well, comic, classic, plastic, frantic, critic, concentric, and volcanic is an IC suffix. That is the final K as a suffix. Those are all suffixes. That's different than the sound we hear here. And that's something to distinguish later on. These are words that older kids are going to grasp into. So we teach them this one over here first. So why do we use a C and not a K to spell the words in the initial position? Well, because the letter after that is going to be A, O, or U, or a consonant. Why a CT pattern commonly in those Latin roots? Because the root is packed, fect, spect. So those ones that ect is part of the root. That's why we're going to use that CT. We're not going to use a KT. It's just not an English-based word. It's a Latin-based word. And then what about that C in the final position? Well, it's a final syllable. It's unaccented. It is not, it's a morpheme part. So it's just like the root here. That's how we're going to spell that morpheme part. Okay, I hope that wasn't too confusing. All right, I'm going to let you guys try this one and then we're going to take a look. But what you're going to see is the same thing for when we need to have the silent E doing double duty, when it's just going to be helping out with the G to make the just sound, or when that vowel needs a protector. Same thing down here. When can that vowel need a protector, the TCH, so it's a short vowel, or when does that CH just can go on its own? So I'm going to let you pause, try those out. You're going to add the ending you think is most appropriate, and then we'll look at the rule that goes with it. Okay, welcome back. I know there's a lot of workbook practices on this one. So the rule that shows up is DGE is used after a short vowel. GE comes after a consonant or a long vowel. And AGE is a final syllable for edge. So we've got a morpheme. We've got a phoneme constraint here where we have, it's going to be after a consonant or a long vowel, and then we have a protector thing happening. So you should have ended up with these endings. Again, that's a morpheme. That's a morpheme. That's a morpheme. So it's going to have a different rule on that. It's going to have two sounds. It's edge. Okay. Then looking here at the TCH and the CH, again, it's not going to be TCH here because it is a long vowel team. We need a short vowel, so we need a TCH. We need a TCH because it's a short vowel. Crunch is correct. It has a consonant before the CH, so we're allowed to use that. So take a look at the others. Do you see the same kind of pattern showing up? TCH is used right after a stressed short vowel. CH is after a long vowel, a diphthong, or a consonant. That's why most of everybody focuses on the TCH rule, because any other circumstance, it's going to be a CH. It's easier for kids to understand that. Whew, have I lost you yet? It's okay to pause. It's okay to go back to review and practice these. Again, this is why I made you that reference slideshow, because keeping all these straight at the same time is a little bit challenging, but kids and you can get these as you're working on them in that week of that practice. This is why orthographic mapping is so important. It gives you a chance to introduce this to them on the first day, talk to them about it, practice with them, and then have them practice throughout your rotation, continually to apply these things. Now, it's really fun as they get really good at applying the guide and they are encoding and they're spelling these words. It's fun to bring out these oddities toward the end and say, let's talk about why this one doesn't quite fit the pattern. And it's important to bring out these hard word patterns that don't quite follow the guide, because then you can talk about why. Is it word origin? Is it because there's a sound we didn't pay attention to before? Or is it a true oddity? And kids love it. They have so much fun being word nerds and trying to stump the teacher and say, I found this word. Why doesn't this word work? Let's talk about it. And they get to be really good at distinguishing things. But you have to give them adequate practice. All right. So here's a spelling pattern of the j, the k, and those. You can have some chance to look at what you can create from them. So you're going to create words from the stem and then add the appropriate ending. So go ahead and pause, try it out, and then we'll take a look. Okay, welcome back. So if my stem was RA, if I wanted to put a short vowel on it, then I could use CK, I could use DG, I could use TCH, right? Anything that's going to help protect that short vowel. If I want to do it with a long vowel, I can pop on that soft G, I can pop on that soft C, because I don't really care about that vowel staying short. So I'm going to click through them, see what you guys could come up with your own. But that's what you should be noticing is what spelling patterns support keeping the long vowel, what's the patterns support keeping the short vowel. These are important that kids know, because then when they go to decode it, they know, oh, well, I see a TCH. That's going to automatically tell me what my vowel says. It helps with decoding a ton, and we build that because we encode with it first. So they start seeing these things as units, and they're like, oh, it's not a TCH separate, it's a TCH unit, automatically tells me my vowel is short. And we start looking, and kids do this, and you want kids to do this, they start looking then at the word as a whole and looking for those patterns. This is one of those things that prompted the whole word fiasco, is you do tend to start looking at the word as a whole once you know what these patterns are, and once you know that these spelling combinations, these graphings are a group that represent the sound. You just have to start with those, and then it builds into that kind of, oh, I see F-U-D-G-E. D-G-E is going to make my U say, that's a fudge. And they start doing that. You just can't start there and have memorization. You have to break it up into phonemes so they get there. Okay, I hope that made sense. If that doesn't, make sure to ask me. Let's take a look at AGE suffix. It's kind of an interesting little phenom, because you have a couple of definitions that AGE will create on a word. So it can be like an amount of, the result of an action. It can be a condition. It can be a collection, or it can create a place. So you take that and you look at the base word and think, is this going to show me an amount? or is it going to show me a place? So take a minute, look at tonnage, and what do you think? Is AGA going to which one of those things? Hopefully you had a chance to pause. And if you said an amount, yeah, tonnage is an amount of tons. Luggage would be a collection of things to be lugged around. How about shrinkage? If you're going to say the result of an action, close. It's actually a condition of actually shrinking, because remember, shrinkage is like that process. Wreckage, that's a result of a wreck. So that's how it's a little different than shrinkage. Wreckage is what happens after the fact. So if you have a wreck, then all the stuff that's left over is wreckage. Shrinkage isn't the result of something shrinking. It's actually the process of that shrinking. It's the condition of it getting smaller. And then, of course, storage is a place where things are stored. So this is an example of morphemes and how morphemes are influential on those base words, which is kind of fun. Complex consonant stuff, they're great. Okay. I told you this whole section is full of workbook pages, full of them. So really quickly, we're going to take a look at how the voice of the vowel will alternate for choice spellings for some of our favorite vowel sounds. And I know that a lot of teachers wring their hands when they get to the section of the book, because long U is so fun. It has two different sounds because the spellings are shared. And this would be where I think you have a lot of confusion. It's one of the last long sounds to be taught because there are technically two vowel sounds happening and we share spellings. And there's some overlapping that happens, and there are some indicators that let you know when you're going to have a U and when you're going to have an oo. And that is something that's really hard for kids to understand, but they can get it. We just have to be very, very explicit and purposeful and try not to do them at the same time. I would never do U and oo in the same week. That would just be way too confusing. So remember that long U has two forms. It's glided with a y in front of it and unglided with just an oo. Now, we overlap those sometimes, but we're going to start to see some patterns just to help out with. So this is, again, when a word sort would be incredibly helpful. And that's what this first activity does. We're going to look for words that have just the oo, as in ooze. I have my two samples wrong. Ooze should be in this column. Or words with the y in the front, like use. So listen to those two words again and hear the slight difference. Ooze, use. In use, you should hear a y in front of that. Ooze is just a pure oo. So I have those two sample words swapped. I'll fix that later. But please remember, this is oo and this is you. So pause for a few minutes. Separate these words over here into those columns. So hopefully you paused and didn't just wait for me to stop and then do it. These are the words with the oo, tuna, flute, group, suit. You guys can hear that pure oo. And then over here should be the ones that have that y in them. Puny, cute, few, argue, immune. You hear that y in there, okay? Now, what do we notice about any patterns within that? Do you see any sounds that come before that oo sound that may not permit us to go into a u sound? Anything yet? Take a minute to look. Okay, if you can't see it, that's okay. Let's try the next one and see if we can start building up a little bit of that and see if you can start hearing some of those differences. Graphemes used for both sounds. We have oo as in ooze and food, u as in use. So in the initial position, oops. In the middle, followed by a syllable, in the middle of a syllable, followed by a consonant. Food, zoom, group, root, flute. Final position in a syllable inside of a word, tuna. And then final position at the end of a word, grew, renew, untrue, cashew. Okay? Now let's take those same words and let's look at you. In the initial position, your euphism, Europe, euphonious. Middle, cure, immune, fume, mute. Final, puny, fuel. And final at the end of the word, few, argue, rescue. What do you guys see? Anything yet? Well, you will often use these for both sounds, and these are only for unglided. So that can help distinguish a little bit. Vowel consonant E, EW, UE, and U are going to use for both sounds. OO, UI, and OU for just unglided, for just the oo. And there's some helpful hints here that don't true all the time, but are nice, helpful things that you find in the slideshow. T's don't like to have the glided. Tuna, it does not like to go tuna. L's and R's do not like the glided. They do not like reued or flew. Just because our mouth does not like to move that way. So sometimes you can have that be a helpful hint. F goes both ways. It does food and feud. So that isn't as helpful as we want to. And most of the time, N is also one that does not like to come before the glided one. New is going to be new. So T's, R's, and L's and N's are sometimes a helpful hint for when it's going to just be an oo. And usually everything else will let you have the y on it. Okay? So EU is used at the beginning of Greek-based words. EW, UE, and U consonant E are preferred at the end. U is an open syllable. It's not going to be at the end. OU and UI are only in middle syllables followed by consonants. So these are some of those rules that we can help those with. Now, again, we're talking second and third grade mastery here. We are not looking at first grade and kindergarten mastery with this one. It is just too complicated. So second grade, you're going to be introduced to this. Third grade and fourth grade, we're trying to master it. First grade, you can introduce the vowel consonant E, but make sure they know the difference between the glided and the unglided. Whew. So have you noticed that open syllables and closed syllables and vowel consonant teams and vowel plus R, these are things that are mattering right now, right? As we're looking at what patterns come into place and when to use different things, we care if it's an open or closed syllable. We care if it's a vowel consonant E. We start caring about if vowel teams exist. So it's very important that your students have an understanding of what these kind of syllables are. Closed syllables are the most common unit in English. Short vowels are followed by one or more consonant. They need to understand this. And if they can understand open and closed in kinder, this is great. They can't. They should be able to. But you're going to have to explicitly introduce this idea of open and closed syllables. That a long vowel is going to be spelled with an open single vowel letter. First grade, we start looking at vowel consonant E patterns. Then we start introducing vowel teams. Toward the end of first grade, we start looking at vowel plus R. Second grade, we spend a lot of time working on vowel teams because they should have mastered on vowel consonant E. We start giving them some more mastery at vowel plus R, and we start working on this consonant L, which gives us kind of an ul or a schwa. Third grade, we're going to master these two. And so we have kinder, first intro, second review intro, third mastery, okay? But it's really important kids understand that because when they are learning patterns, they need to listen for these things and then know why. And then that'll help them to build up that decoding ability to do so, okay? Now, that is, of course, a little different than principles of spelling or syllable division. This previous page deals with some of that syllable division, but because it tells us, what the vowel is going to say, and that helps us to decode. But this also has to involve the syllable division we get when we're doing it in print, because that will help us to decode what we're trying to do. So really in this chapter, we're talking about orthographic mapping is not only building and writing the word and spelling it and learning the patterns that go with the sounds we hear, but then progressing into the natural byproduct of decoding. And this is where we start to see the decoding building in, right? Because we know how these patterns work together in these syllables, then when we see those syllables as a unit, we're going to know what they say, okay? So compound words, that's a syllable division you see in print that's going to help with decoding. Then you have, if you have a syllable between two, or sorry, a consonant between two vowels, you're going to have a choice. You want to look for your desired vowel sound, either after the first vowel or after the consonant. So you end up with either pilot or pilot. That vowel sound will be determined where that syllable break is. Then, of course, you have between two consonants. This is one of the ones the kids like the best because it's easiest to see. That creates a short vowel in the first syllable. So between the two consonants is super helpful. And then you have consonant LE as its own separate. It could be a short vowel in front. It could be a long vowel. You just know that you have the consonant LE is going to be its own, and that can help determine what the vowel sound then says. Of course, prefixes and suffixes are their own syllables. And we do not divide between digraphs. So these things hopefully are showing you that we've moved from encoding and building, hearing the sound, pulling out the pattern with the constraint and the rule that we wanted, and putting it into our word. And now we're going to use that unification of that pattern group, that TCH, or that double consonant together. We're now going to use that to realize, oh, because that occurred, this vowel has to say this has to say that. And you're getting into the decoding world now, okay? Now, when we do that, I want you to be aware, again, of that maximinal onset rule of when we speak, we want to move that consonant over to the next syllable. So we cannot base our syllabication rule off of where our speech is saying, right? We explicitly teach that syllable pattern for decoding because our mouth is not going to match what it does. And here's a good example of what happens. Lemon, this is how we say it, but this is how we break it up. If we saw it divided like this, the students are going to get incredibly confused and be like, that's an open syllable. You just told me that was an open syllable. I can't do that. You've got to follow this rule here, okay? Blackout, again, this is how we say it. Blackout, this is how it's divided. So I'm hoping what you're seeing is that we cannot create and encode via what we say, okay? If we do some encoding like that, it's going to confuse kids about like, well, this is going to say but that's a vowel T. So I always encourage teachers to say, this is black out. I hear two words, black out. Let's do black, let's do out. And then they encode that. If you do bleeding, then you have bleeding. I hear an ing, that's a suffix, right? So I'm going to help kids recognize that when we're encoding, what that rule is, so that when they see that we're decoding, they see those as units as well, okay? Again, if that's confusing, let me know what that would look like. Here's an example of what that would look like with syllable mapping. We're going to do our first word, and this one is going to be rabbit. And so what I would tell them is, I'm going to give you the syllables. We're going to have rab, it, bit, and we're going to do the syllable break here with, I have two syllables. My first syllable is rab, and my last syllable is bit. I'm going to break them into syllables for them. And then we're going to encode it that way. Now, again, if I was doing decoding, I would show them where the break was so they could see that this was an a. I'm going to tell the kids that it's not going to match how I usually say it. I'm going to teach them what that maximal onset rule is because it happens and it's real. The next word is going to be commitment. And again, I'm going to break up that syllables for them. We're going to count them. How many syllables are in commitment? Commitment. There's 3. So boys and girls, your first syllable is com. This is a prefix. How do we spell that one? Our next syllable is mint. Our last syllable is meant. So I'm breaking that up for them instead of having them sound out each individual sound. Again, this is the next layer up from just doing the normal orthographic mapping that we did before. Let's try independent together. as though we were students, right? So the word is independent. What's the word? Independent. Let's count how many syllables we have. Independent. I have 4 syllables. Now I would go through, and instead of being sound boxes, these would be syllable boxes. Now, if you like it this way better, that's totally fine. If you don't want to confuse kids about this being sound box as opposed to a syllable box, that's totally fine. I probably lean a little bit more to this way just because I want to show them that they're syllables, so I have a break in between. So we have 4 syllables. Our first syllable was in. Boys and girls, how should we represent in? I-N. If they're that point. If they're struggling, then you might say, okay, let's take in and let's break it up into sounds. So they get the I-N. How would we do the second one? The second syllable was D. And I would just go through each syllable. Again, this is higher. This is like 2nd, 3rd grade, mostly 3rd grade. So their one-to-one correspondences are going to be a lot stronger. So you can break it up into syllables and spell it by syllable instead. Okay. Once you got through D-E-N-T, I would still go, let's do a syllable check. Independent. Let's read it. Independent. Our word is independent. I would still put that embedded decoding in there because we want to pay attention to, that's the point of the syllable work, is decoding it after what's there. Okay, last example is representative. So again, what's the word? Actually, I messed up. I'm so sorry. You want to put it in a sentence. Our class will elect a representative to go to the principal to tell him how we feel. So what was our word? Representative. Let's count our syllables. Representative. How many do we have? We should have 5 syllables. Representative. Representative. Yeah, I didn't recount. Sorry. Again, our first prefix is re. Again, it sounds like rep because of maximal onset rule, but we're going to have re, presentative. Again, I'll go through each one of those with them and give them what the syllable is. I know it's a little bit trickier for this one, but you can, and Louisa does say this in another video, you can do rep and have REP, rep, recentative, and you can do it out like that to where it follows a little more of the maximal onset rule. But I would definitely go back and reemphasize that the suffix or the prefix is re, right? It's to do again, because they're not going to see rep as a prefix, or they're going to get confused to what those prefixes and suffixes are. Okay. All right. So what we have now is activity, exercise 48. We're going to take a look at some of those 6 syllable types. And I already did this one for you, it looks like, because I wanted you to take a look and see how they break up. So take a minute and look at that. How did you break them up? Why did you put them where they were? And how did you do? Again, let's talk about this one in person. It's a little bit easier to do that instead of on a webinar. Okay, so if we want to know that English is predictable correspondence, right? First thing we need to know, the kids need to know that, yes, we have one-to-one letter correspondences. This is kindergarten, right? About 50% of our language, it is going to be one-to-one. They can trust that. They need to know that one sound can be represented by 1, 2, 3, or sometimes 4. So it is okay to use more than one letter to represent a sound, because what we are doing is we're focusing on the sound and not the letter. And it's a shift because we've grown up so many times thinking the letter says. We're focused in on the sound, and it's important that they know that we're focused on the sound. We need them to understand that position will govern what letters can be used, okay? And giving them a first choice, second choice, third choice for the spelling actually is incredibly helpful. So if I'm doing oi, it has 2 places that it can be. End of a syllable, middle of a word, it's going to be these different things, right? Ow, you can say it can be at the end of a word, it can be at the end of a syllable. Your first choice might be this, your second choice might be that, especially as we get to some of those more complicated vowel patterns. That actually does help kids a lot. And then remember that syllable and morpheme patterns will affect spelling, and especially with short vowels and things like that. If we can help students understand these principles, like we talked at the very beginning of the chapter, spelling is not going to be so invasive, okay? Now, I'm going to back away from spelling a little bit and we're going to go into decoding of big words. So we were looking at independent, we were looking at some of those things where we're looking at word parts, right? Well, there are some strategies for helping them decode. Since we're moving away from encoding and how this is now hybrid and unified into decoding and seeing these spelling patterns as units, let's continue that vibe with a big word, right? First thing that we want to do is we're going to locate and put a line under each vowel that we see, right? Because we know that each vowel is going to be a syllable, right? Every syllable has a vowel sound. We're going to box any familiar endings, any familiar suffixes that we know. For example, tion might be something that they know. Then circle any familiar word parts or groups that they know, like trans. I know this was a little out of order, but they can see, okay, I got that trans. I've seen that before. Use syllable division to say, okay, I'm going to separate my prefix from my other word, or I'm going to use two consonants or sitting there side by side. SF is not a digraph. It's a blend I can break up. And then you can sit there and put the pieces together and see, or same thing with up here. TION, it's going to be its own suffix. I can break it there. I see 4. Then what you can do is to say those pieces, transformation. So even though they couldn't read transformation off the bat by itself, they can if we're using some of these helpful things. See if it makes sense, right? So here's another one. I'm going to locate any of those vowel sounds, right? Or any of those vowels. And even if it's a silent one, I'm still going to mark the vowels. I'm going to put a box around anything that I know that looks familiar. Marking my consonants real fast. There I have by is something that looks familiar. O by itself, I'm using syllable division for some of these sounds, right? And then I'm just going to take it a piece at a time. If it's by, it's open. O is open. Lu is open. This one, me, I'd probably say my first. Bioluminescence, but we realize this is a schwa. So I might even mark that further with that star. This is a schwa. Sense with those C's on there. So yes, we are still breaking up into syllables, but we've got to use those open and closed syllable rules. We know we've got to use some of those syllabication rules that we know. And that's just good practice to help get some of those big words going. Okay, so kind of as a recap here, we know that some of the letters are used as markers. They have no direct relation to the sound themselves, but they signal the sound that other ones should be making, such as the K, such as the E, as in have and love. We know that has no influence on the vowel sound, but we also know that it's a marker to prevent the V from being at the end. There's cannot have a V at the end of the word for some particular reason. You also know that it can act as a protector from things ending in U. We don't like words ending in a plain U, and we don't like words ending in a J, right? You can keep G from sounding like a J, E in a date that marks the long vowel. So helping with those kind of things. We talked all about that, so sorry if that was confusing. Okay. We've got some conventions, such as some of those are just kind of arbitrary, like we don't know exactly why, but they exist. For example, I and J won't be at the end of a word, or they won't ever be doubled either, except if you have skiing or bookkeeping. That's a compound word. Consonant digraphs are 2 letters, even though they represent a single sound. You're not going to end a word in J or V. So that's why you get some of those funny things coming up. And E's just crazy. So remember when I told you guys earlier in chapter 2 that we don't want to say the letter says E or E says eh, because E is the perfect example of why you don't want to do that. E changes. E has so many different jobs to do that it can get super confusing. So I like to joke that E must be a teacher because there's so much for him to do as a letter. Here are a few. It signals when you're going to have a voiced TH. It is the core helper of a vowel consonant E pattern. It's there to stop words from looking like plurals, like false. E is also there to protect a Z that doesn't belong to the root. It's there to prevent a U and I or a V from being at the end. It's there to be part of a syllable. It's to signal a soft G or soft C. It's because of history, like in come. It's just there because they wanted it to be there. It was embellished in scribes things. It's to prevent confusion with or and or, O-R and O-R-E. It's so arbitrary. There's so many reasons why we have silent E. Some of them make sense. Some of them don't quite make sense. There are reasons for a lot of those in page 104 if you wanted to go look at that. But again, it's one of the reasons why we can't say the letter says. That's the biggest thing that I have gleaned from that, is that you just can't say the letter says because there's a lot of different jobs that certain letters can do. Okay, so let's talk about some suffixes. So there are some orthographic rules. So we took a break from encoding. We went into a little bit of decoding how they're connected. Now we're going to go a little bit back into encoding because we have some older age things that need to be taken care of, such as adding on a suffix. So when do you double the final consonant? Well, when you want the vowel to stay short, right? Anytime you add a suffix, if you need that vowel to stay short vowel, double the consonant before you add your ending, especially if it has a vowel at the beginning of the suffix. Do not double if you have a vowel team, ever. You're going to do great with that. Doesn't need anything. Do not double if you have two consonants already. There's no need. The vowel is already protected. If you have two syllables, check to see if the first syllable is stressed. One vowel and one consonant, then you're going to see, okay, I need to have a double letter on there. But if you have, check final syllable for stress, one vowel, one consonant, double if the suffix begins with a vowel. So your doubling rule really comes into if your suffix begins with a vowel and you have your stress in the right place or not. So little helpful hint there. This one is not as common, so older grades need a little help with this one, but the other ones, pretty straightforward, even in younger grades. Okay, so rule of thumb, if the suffix begins with a consonant, there's no need to double that. Final consonant in the word or the root is totally fine. All right, so now let's take a look at some other things that we're going to do with that final E on our words when we're doing different things with suffixes or changing the word up a little bit. We're going to start with these questions such as, when am I going to drop that final E? When do I actually change the Y to I? And when do I need to double between syllables? These again are some of these spelling guidelines that are going to be really helpful for students to know and things to look out for. So looking at the first one, if a word ends in silent E, we will drop the E before we add a suffix that begins with a vowel. This is all going back to keeping that same vowel sound that we wanted before. Do you remember why we doubled? Well, we double consonants because we want the vowel to stay short. If we want the vowel to stay long, then we can go ahead and drop that E if it still has a vowel in the suffix. For example, ing starts with a vowel, and so we are going to be able to influence that A and keep it aping instead of tapping, right? Same thing, ed starts with a vowel, so we can drop that silent E, add the vowel sound on, add the suffix on. Er starts with a vowel, so when we add er to the word bake, we're going to drop that finally instead of having a double E there, okay? We're going to keep the E if the consonant begins with a if the suffix begins with a consonant. For example, less starts with an L, we're going to keep the E. If we have FUL, full, we'll keep the E because, again, the suffix begins with a consonant, so do not drop the E for that. We're going to change the Y to an I, when we're adding a suffix on, usually, because we will lose that Y doesn't really fit in with the suffix. So happy, you're going to change a Y to I. Holy, you change a Y to I. Now there is an occurrence when you don't want to change that Y to I, and that's going to be when the suffix begins with an I, because we don't like having a double I. So kind of a cool rule of thumb is always change the Y to I unless your suffix has an I. And then you don't, right? Now, if you do have a vowel that comes before, like in boy, you're not going to want to change either. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a very odd spelling. So, when do we double? Well, if we want to have laxed vowels, then like closed syllables, we want to double it so that we have less ambiguity for the reader, such as Scrabble and rabbits. We want to make sure we have our closed syllables separated there. And if there's a consonant LE will produce a tense vowel unless it's protected by a double consonant. So things like nettle, metal, little, those guys you're going to want to have a double letter in there, just because we want to have that protection from those long vowel sounds kind of meddling with it. Then, when do I have just one? Well, things like able, title, ogle, they're not as tense. Those are just some things to remember, okay? So if I changed nettle and I had one T, it would actually become needle. Needle would be if I had just one D. So we'd have those there to protect that laxed vowel, okay? So then we know schwa is coming into this, especially when you heard that consonant LE piece. Schwa is coming into play here, and especially when it comes to some spellings. So think about your stress. Think about your rhythm, right? So when you have an unstressed syllable, that's where your schwa is going to come out, right? The stressed syllables are going to be usually louder and more emphasized, and you'll be able to pick them out. It's like banana, those are unstressed. Na has that stress on it. Chocolate, chalk has your stress. Fountain, has your stress on it, right? They'll get these more easily if they are familiar with the syllables, with the morphemes and the word meanings, so we know where those schwas will occur, okay? Interesting enough, something to help them be aware of is when you have the schwa at the very beginning of a word, like again, about and around, most often it will be spelt with an A, so you can teach them that guideline. That's super helpful. So let's practice a little bit with our schwa and when schwa happens. First activity on exercise 5 is you're going to divide each word into syllables and sort them into the schwa that you produce. So we have schwa has slightly different sounds. I know we always emphasize that schwa is but schwa can actually kind of somewhere in between an I and an That's what this middle one represents. And in longer words, most often you hear the schwa more of an I in those longer Latin words. And that still counts as a schwa because it's an unaccented portion. So if I take a look at that first one, which is Adam, is that more of an Is it kind of an in between an I and an or is it an I? So Adam, Adam. I hear it as an Then you have basin. See, basin, you can hear that bass, it's right in there. Take a look at that and see how you did. I should have paused it, but I forgot to pause it. Ask me if you have any questions about why certain things, if you can hear the difference between some of those schwas. So even though you might have an open syllable, you might still have the schwa sound occurring. This is why we joke around that schwa happens, because schwas don't play fair. So what you're going to do is activity 2, you're going to underline the unaccented syllable that the schwa does. So here you have describe. Now some people might say describe, but you can also pronounce it as describe. Dynasty has an kind of has that little bit of an there. That one I would count as the slight or it's right there in the middle. So these guys are open syllables, even though they are schwas, right? So again, these are more complicated words that we teach kids that heart patterns work the best for them. Now, in activity 3, we're going to notice that the sound of the middle syllable changes in its unaccented position in longer words. This is where it gets harder in 3rd and 4th grade, is because you're actually going to have some schwas show up because we added suffixes to it, right? So here I have separate, compromise. If you took this smaller version, then the sound would change, right? Equalize, central, centralize. You can hear the ul and the kind of changed a little bit in that one. And then activity 4, they're having you pick out again where the schwa was. Televise, that's more of an I sound. Instigate, it's kind of an I. Memorize, you have these unaccented pieces that have sometimes a little slight to it. In two-syllable words, a nice tricky rule of thumb is that the first syllable is going to be more accented or accented more often than the second one. So the second syllable on these bigger words, have the students look for the schwa in there. And again, for as far as spelling is concerned, it's going to be a heart pattern because there's really not a rhyme or reason for schwa sometimes. Continuing with activities, activity 5, match one syllable for each column to make a word. Activity 6, underline the misspelled schwa in each word. And activity 7, break down the word in syllables underlined with the I connector. I'm going to pause the video here and let you guys do that, and then we'll go check our answers and what we're going to look at the end from all of these activities, from activity 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 7, is what pattern do we discover through some of these activities that we're playing with schwa. Okay, so I'm going to pause. So now you should have been able to pause and come back on. Let's check out our answers for activity 5. We have match one syllable for each one to make a word. So they had dissipate, correlate, detonate were our choices. The misspelled schwa, algebra, illustrate. So you can see we have some A's and some M's coming in wrong. And then we had our break the word into syllables and find the connectors. Radiant, kind of have an I. Decapitate, it's like an I, that's an I one. Because I kind of say decapitate. A lot of people say decapitate. So it's kind of an I, flipping around a little bit. Did we notice any patterns from these activities? That you often have an I connector that makes a long sound when it comes before a vowel, and it will be a schwa when it is followed by a consonant. So you start to notice that, oh, okay, you have more of an I when there's a consonant, and when it comes before a vowel. Kind of interesting, isn't it? All right, so now we're going to look at how in the world am I supposed to cover all of these rules and all of these patterns in a lesson. So we're going to come back to our flow chart, right? Now this is one idea of a structured literacy plan with time allotments given by Louisa. We've talked individually about how that could look personally in your classroom. I think the key component is to make sure that we have these important parts because we're building the foundation and knowing when and how to bring these spelling rules in. And that does need to be individualized for your class, for you. So remember, we're going to have phonological awareness, establishing and activating our language processor. We're going to make sure that we hear sounds, can manipulate sounds, because we're going to depend on that foundation in order to bring all these other pieces together. Brings us then to a phonemic focus of, okay, now I'm going to focus in on one sound and its features. And then that phonics instruction is, I'm going to attach the rules and the spelling guides to that particular sound, again, based on where it is and its frequency of occurrence. Once we have established that and we're continually attaching that spelling to the sound and we're building those words, you actually will then turn into this unification to where they don't see those individual letters as individual letters, but they see it as a unit. This is where the idea of word families came in, but it just got twisted around a little bit. They're going to be now unified. They see that pattern, and decoding is actually a very quick byproduct of encoding. It's so important that they build with that sound and build that code before they start decoding that code. Now, it's not a long period in between. Please don't wait days and days and days before you start decoding, but you need to do an encoding and building with the words before you start reading the words. I know a lot of curriculums flip it, but that's why our kids are still struggling. So let's take a look at the suggested time. First, have a review of previous skills taught, 5 to 7 minutes. Excuse me, we've been calling this the 3-part drill, giving us a nice quick review of past skills. We're not putting our new skills in here until after the first couple days. Then you can start putting the skills that you introduced earlier that week. You need a phonological awareness warm-up. We talked about you can do Heggerty as a whole thing, or you can do a piece of it. I would suggest 1 or 2 activities if you're going to do just a warm-up, again, to activate that phonological warehouse. It can be 2 to 3 minutes long, really not super long. Now, you're going to want to have a statement of the goal, like what we're going to try to do today, introduction or explanation of, or a demonstration of the orthographic pattern we're using. This one, again, is your anticipatory set / your introduction for a lesson. It can be 5 to 7 minutes long. It doesn't have to be that long. Again, tailored to the needs of your students. Then you're going to do very direct instruction practice, right? So this can be included the phonemic focus and the phonics instruction. It's an I do. I'm going to show you. We're going to do it together. We're going to practice. You are going to do it as I guide you through it before I have you do it by yourself, okay? That's going to be the bulk of your lesson. You're going to dictate a few words that follow the orthographic pattern. That's going to be 2 or 3 minutes. And then you're going to support it with your decodables, your decoding. You can do some comprehension questions that'll come later. That could be 15 to 20 minutes. Now, if I added all of that up, you're looking at close to an hour, right? That's not necessarily plausible for our time frame. So what we're going to do is we're going to break up some of these things into a little bit more efficient method of time, right? Okay, so for example, you might try just doing a 3-minute review. Do a 3 to 5 minute phonological awareness warm-up depending on what activity you choose. Again, your statement of goal can be a lot shorter than the recommendation from the book. And then 10 minutes of practice is going to include this dictation. So even though she has it separate here as 2 to 3 minutes as opposed to 10 minutes, I'm just going to include that into your 10 minutes and then 10 to 15 minutes within that supported text, the decoding. So now you're looking at more of 25 to possibly 30 minutes. The writing to respond one is really nice to 10 minutes, but you can bring that into later in the week when you get to shorten up some of this stuff up here, or you put it into your comprehension piece as well. Okay? So things that could look like. Review from your phonological awareness pieces or your 3-part drill. Do a short activity you can pull from your curriculum. State your goal, your articulation piece in there. Practice building words. Do some dictation. Bring in a decodable, and then maybe have a response to it. And that's just a very overall guide of what you could make that look like. Again, I would love to talk to you guys in person to build that up on your own. Now the rest of the slides show some tools that you can use. We've talked a lot about this ourselves, so I'm going to go through this really briefly because we know you can do a review with phonological awareness with Heggerty. You can pull in from your curriculum. They have once or twice they have some phonological activities to bring in. You've got your spelling words you can use for your spelling connection. You've got these rules to help you with knowing what rules to put in and when to do, or what kind of guides there are. There are videos to show you articulation. There's the Kid Lips, the sound wall, and all of those pieces as well. Oops, let's go there. You have your orthographic mapping component. You can pull that from your curriculum. You can practice on the Elkonin boxes. There's a routine that you can set up that's going to be really easy to incorporate. Again, we can talk about that and show you how that works. And I would keep these. I would use these as an exit ticket, just kind of analyze what they're doing wrong. This can be shorter on day 1 and 2 and get longer on like a day 3 or 4 or a day 5. By day 5 or 6, whenever you're going to do your spelling test, keep that and use that as a formative assessment, right? You can also be informal on whiteboards for you to go check later. You can put them in, make sure to put them into sentences. And you can even grab words that you pulled from your decodable as well. Keep it in perspective for all these other pieces. This is your comprehension section, which can be 15 to 20 minutes, and we will talk about that a little bit more later this year in later chapters, just how we're going to incorporate some of these other pieces to do the connected text that you saw on her one, or her thing. Again, also with the writing, that'll come up a little later. So, if we're looking at bringing in reading, phonics, comprehension, the semantics, the vocabulary, 60 minutes for that is great. There is a way to do your phonics and your comprehension with your vocabulary and your language structures within 60 minutes. You do 30 minutes at least of your intervention, 20 minutes of grammar, and then preferably 40 minutes of writing. You can have your whole ELL block all set up with really good structure in 2.5 hours. I know that's a bit of a debate with some of our principals, but it's ideally you tie the grammar and writing together, and that could be a way that you set up your ELA blocks of time, okay? Let's see. And that, my dear friends, is the end of our chapter.